sessions. I have great pleasure in introducing Nicola, who's going to. Okay. He's going to speak anyway next. So. All right. Will tell us what his presentation is about.
Presentation is construction of solution. Construction of simulation model for systemizing international migration. I will talk about only construction of model, not about prognosis on it. When constructing the model, I proceeded from the fact that the migration processes in model that relies upon a system that is self-organizing and self-regulating. And we understand that many factors influence the state of the system and its development. Proceeding from the point of view of self-organization, we call it critical, important. The further state of this model is determined by its internal parameter order and its internal impulses. That's why the ascending hypothesis of constructing the model of migration flows is the assumption that it is possible to determine the degree of mutual attraction of pairs of countries for the migration flow at a certain amount of time each one and so on, which will determine the directions and density of migration flows of next forecasted period. In contrast to rather widespread approach I often the concepts of country suppliers and countries' experience. For example, I'm representative of country supplier. This is because I'm from Ukraine, and each country in model considered a priori twice as potential supplier and as potential international migrants. However, when building the model, I used such terms only in, for defining position of country. And at this point, it is country of source of migrants or country of destination of migrants. So the model takes the consideration that potential attraction of migrants to a country of potential destination. The main factors are the presence and the relative number of diaspora from potential country source of migrants in the potential country destination. It is evident that, as a rule, the larger diaspora cause the great next waves of immigrants. The presence and the relative number of migrants from other countries in the potential country destination. All we know how it will be with now with Poland, where Ukrainians don't give any place to Bulgarians, for example. The next factor, the dynamics of increase of the number of migrants in the potentially country destination, and the ratio between the increase of the number of migrants from each country with the same increase from all countries. The volume of potential migrants flows in each pair of migration interactions, so-called migration interactions between countries, is influenced by the presence and relative number of extra people, so-called, I'm sorry for this term, in potential country supplier of migrants. The number of these people determined by the ratio between the available population in a given country and the number of persons who immigrated from it during the last observation period. Let's clarify the way of calculating of extra people. At first glance, when calculating the number of people potentially ready to leave the country supplier of migrants, all extras, so-called extras, people should be calculated in relation to the population, second point. For example, we have some number of population to 1990, and all extra people are ready to go out. But And we have many such descriptions from physicians. For example, they say, look, Nigeria's population, for example, Nigeria's population will increase from 140 million in 2010 to 500 million in 2050. We know that it isn't any business in Nigeria. We don't know what we can do there. I don't know what to do in Nigeria. And therefore, this extra 360 million people will bounce from the poor Western or Eastern Europe as migrants. But at the same time, we have a situation when, according to the data of the United Nations, always the number of migrants from the respective countries remains almost constant during the same periods. More precisely, the ratio between the number of people in the country and the number of actually extra people who indeed became the immigrants remains almost unchanged, although it tends to slow gradual increase. Therefore, when calculating the number of extra people, I proceeded from the ratio of the volume of immigration in the previous period of modeling and the relative increase of the population of the country supply of migrants, rather than from simple absolute population growth. As a result, for each direction of each pair of countries, I get the index of mutual attractiveness for migrants. As it is a picture, attractiveness of the country. Attractiveness of the country 1 for migrants from the country 2 for migrants from country 1, and attractiveness of country 1 to migrants from country 2. We understand that in the realistic situation, we can see zero attractiveness for Ukraine, for example, and for the pair of Ukraine and Polish in one direction, and another attractiveness in the next direction. The values of this indices calculated for each country for the some year determine the percentage of migrant flow from each country's source to each country's recipient in the next time interval. I take, according to the United Nations data, 5 years time intervals. And for the next moment of time, we carried out the next iteration of calculation based on the previous masses of migrants who come to the country. Consequently, the forecast for the next period, the potentially ready to migrate population from the nth country, so-called extra people, are distributed among countries of destination in proportion to the calculated values of the index of mutual attractiveness between every base of countries. And for purpose of forecasting, I use the United Nations data of the projected population and United Nations data for migration between 1990 and 2015. The first variant of the model was created in simple Excel. The second variant now realized in language R. Thank you very much.
What is the speed? Okay. Second, please.
Okay, so let me just find my bearings. Is this working? Can you hear it? Okay. Now let's see if this is working. Well, I am not Basha Yansevis, as you might have noticed, but the last-minute substitute for Basha, but it's a joint paper on economic turbulence and labor migrants' mobility intentions. So we talk about what people intend to do as opposed to what they actually do. There are Polish migrants in 4 West European EU countries, as listed, in a particularly turbulent, during a particular turbulent period, 2009 to 2016. So I may now, as you are all aware, at the beginning, after the accession in 2004, there was a considerable movement of people from newly acceding countries, such as Poland, but there is a list on the right-hand side of the screen, plus these other countries that joined a bit later. And all in all, this was quite a significant flow of people. So between 2004 and 2013, the number or the stock of nationals from the 11 former communist countries who migrated to EU15 increased threefold, from 1.7 million to nearly 6 million. And of that group of countries, Poland was of course the largest, and at the time the outflow of Poles dominated this sort of total outflow. It was eclipsed later by Romanians, but at the time it did, and it also increased roughly threefold, from about 0.6 million in 2004 to nearly 2 million in 2013. So about 3/4 of all these Polish people moved to 4 countries: UK, Germany, Ireland, and the Netherlands. So in this particular paper, we focus on Polish migrants to these 4 countries during that particular period of time. It is, as I said, an interesting period of time, because once the stocks of Polish migrants to these 4 countries increased over time, as you can see, we used particular source of data. So the data for Netherlands are patchy, and therefore we've got 3 points, 3 observations, as opposed to a continuous sort of imputed line. But you can see that the stocks increased over time between the sort of early 2000s and so 2017, but at a different rate. Now, it is also related to the way the EU opened to migrants from Eastern Europe. So, UK made itself accessible right at the outset of this period, whereas Germany only really allowed migrants from Poland, for example, in 2011. So you can see that it shows there is this sort of point of inflection when you sort of look at Germany. But you also see that there are some sort of these varying rates at which people move to sort of EU15, and this is an interesting period because it coincided both with the steady improvement in the performance of the Polish economy, and it coincided with all these external shocks in the destination countries, which, for example, didn't happen in Poland. So the one particular shock, which is somewhat visible, is the GFC, Great Financial Crisis of 2008, which at least took made the financial market stumble, to some extent real economies, and which initially sort of took 2 years to settle down, but you can still live with the aftershocks of it now. It was then followed by the sovereign EU sovereign debt crisis in the mid-2000s. So if you remember the Euro crisis, Greece, and all of that. And finally, right at the very end of that period, we had Brexit in the UK. So that was another sort of surprise. The data which we used were collected at the end of the year. Brexit, if you remember, or the Brexit referendum vote occurred in June. So there was a time for people sort of to catch up. But generally, if you look at some sort of a income per capita adjusted for the purchasing power of money, that's what it actually buys as opposed to different exchange rates and so on, you find that between the sort of the early period, 2009, and let's say the late period, 2016, the gap between Poland and these Western destination countries was sort of narrowing down, but again in a different way. However, the distribution between different income groups became, in some cases, sort of again squashed, in other cases more skewed. There is, of course, a general problem when you actually want to learn about this mobile population as to what you or who you sample. Okay, people move from Poland to, let's say, UK, then from UK to Germany, but you know, but at any point in time, you deal with a population that you can't quite know who is in country, who is not, on what basis, all these things that you are probably quite aware of. So you find that given that, will be nice to know, and that's what we are sort of interested in, is what are the intentions, mobility intentions, of these people who have become recently mobile, internationally mobile. So these are the people who are the new transnational Europeans. They are not classic emigrants because they never quite emigrated. They retain their nationality under the freedom of movement. They are free to live in another EU country. They are, of course, free to go back. They do not lose the resident rights. There may be some sort of hiccups, but generally they can move on to another country, they can go back, they can stay for good, and we would therefore like to know what they intend to do. Now, people who want to know are the host countries, because the labor markets now are becoming more complicated. It is not so as easy to manage labor markets. If you have got a crisis, you find that different, for example, group of labor market participants can sort of respond or can react differently. And if you know that some are going to both, then perhaps you can start to focus on others. So, in that sense, it is useful to know who intends to do what. Second, it matters to home countries, because countries like Poland hope that at least some of these migrants would go back. It might be a big surprise if they do, but there is a sort of a publicly expressed sentiment that we would like to see at least some of them back. Then, of course, it matters how they intend to, what they intend to do, because it may actually translate into actual behavior. So lots of intentions are just that; they just fade away. But some intentions are followed by action, so that some proportion of people who say, I'm leaving, will actually leave. Then, even if they don't, it's still the attitude matters. Because if you are generally negative about the country you are living in, you don't invest in it. You don't invest in it personally, physically, financially, and so on. You become, you stay as a malcontent. So that's also important. And generally, you know, the intentions mean that you've got sort of a particular attitude to your place of residence. Now, we were lucky to, after Paweł Kaczmarczyk and Anna Nicka, to use data produced by the Polish National Bank, which collects information about Polish migrants in these 4 countries for this particular year. So they are roughly biannual surveys, and you could use those. It is, I won't go into details of this data. They are aimed at learning about migrants' remittances, but they're also useful to tell you generally about their intentions. Now, when you want to see, using this survey data, who these people are, usually, as you can see at the screen, there are the people who tend to be in the country for at least 36 months. There is a relatively smaller proportion of those who are in the country for less than 12 months. And even that proportion in Germany, in Netherlands, in Germany, in Germany is changing, decreasing over time. It's more confusing when you look at it at Ireland and UK. Now, the intentions which were captured in the bank survey are, as you can see, in the screen. And you can see, because these people are these new transnational migrants, that in between the people who have rather vague about their intentions. They don't express the sentiment that they would like to go back soon, but they also don't express the sentiment they would like to stay there forever. So that is what you expect normally with transnationals. Then you can see there are some interesting trends there. Generally, a country which appears to be an outlier is the Netherlands. So there are some, those who want to stay indefinitely seem to be increasing in Germany. They seem to be increasing in Ireland. In UK, probably, except for 2016, Brexit. And in the Netherlands, that particular sentiment is still expressed. When you look at those who say we would like to go back sooner, we'd like to move on soon, then you see everywhere this whole exception of Brexit. That short-term sentiment is decreasing, except Netherlands. So Netherlands is an interesting country. And this is because a large proportion of Polish migrants there are seasonal. So that may be a factor. But there are some other factors. So finally, just to, as we are pushed for time, the question is, what makes these people have this particular intention? So what drives them? No, what economists suggest, it is the earnings. So generally, high-wage countries attract people, and low-wage countries are the source country. But it is perhaps sometimes more subtle than that. For example, there is a particular model, a role model which is used often in these studies, which says that people are seeking a return on their investment in the human capital, on their skills, and therefore they are seeking locations when the skills are relatively well rewarded. So those who are high-skilled people would seek more unequal countries. Those who are low-skilled people would seek more equal countries, more sort of squashed income distribution, because those who've got these skills, which are highly sort of rewarded, they of course look for countries where they could be rewarded. So that's something. The only problem is what is a skill, and skill shouldn't be confused here with a degree or some formal education. It could be a knack for making money. So it is not necessarily directly observable. It may be unobservable. Essentially, what you earn defines what skill you got. So it's sort of, in that sense, it's something worth remembering. So given that, we would sort of modify it a bit further, and that's our sort of prediction or hypothesis, that if you are doing well in a particular country, you're a high earner, your skill is well rewarded, you are more likely to stay. If not, you are more likely to go. And therefore, if you look at the regressions which we performed, the general results are rather confusing. That's the final wisdom. That generally, when you look at people's intentions to return within a year or to stay for good, then they are very vaguely, and with exception of Netherlands, they are not well correlating with areas. And that is when they are controlled for all these other variables which don't explain what some people do. However, they are correlating a bit better when there are some sort of events that make people respond, like economic crisis. So during economic crisis, earnings matter. Otherwise, not necessarily. And they also matter if, for example, integration becomes perhaps more difficult, as in Netherlands. So that's our hypothesis. So generally, they are poor predictors. Earnings are poor predictors of settlement or mobility intentions, except when the times are turbulent. That's the point.
Thank you for that very convincing talk. So now we have Dominika. Very well timed. Thank you. Well timed.
Project I'm going to talk about is my pet project, otherwise known as my PhD project, so I'm very enthusiastic about it. I hope you share my enthusiasm. And it's a good thing that I'm speaking after Professor Markowski, because my PhD project is in the same country, so some of the background knowledge you already have. But here I'm going to talk about only one of them, namely Ireland. And the subject of my presentation is factors influencing destination choice among Polish graduate and non-graduate migrants to Ireland. Numbers of Polish migrants, I think we can skip that. The important thing, important difference between Polish migrants in various countries is their level of education. Broadly speaking, the Poles in Ireland and in the UK are much better educated than those in almost all other countries, especially Germany and the Netherlands. And it looks similar in terms of age, that is, the Poles in the UK and Ireland are younger. And also something I didn't put here, but the size of the town of origin. Poles in the UK and Ireland come from relatively larger towns in Poland than Poles in Germany and other countries. So this has brought me to some obvious questions. Not only why so many Poles went to Ireland, but what is so attractive about Ireland to make the educated Poles go there in larger numbers than elsewhere? And what factors do they take into consideration then? I conducted in-depth interviews with 20 Polish migrants, and the sample is broadly varied in terms of many features, except it's biased towards the educated, because I wanted to have comparable groups of people with third-level degrees and people without. And I conducted these interviews. I mostly found these people on Facebook, on the appropriate sort of polls in somewhere groups. And most of the interviews were conducted by Skype or Messenger, preference with possible. And my theoretical framework, I place this in the push-pull framework, which you might say is very general, but I think it's very relevant for this because, as in the whole project, I'm looking at why people chose particular destinations. They might have the same factors which motivated them to leave Poland, but the question is, these are relatively similar countries in economic terms, so why did they choose Ireland over the UK or Ireland over the Netherlands and so on? And what did I find? First of all, the legal factors. As you know, there were transition periods in Germany, Austria, and other countries, but not in Ireland. So for those people who did migrate when the transition periods were still operating, I asked them if this was important to them. But I didn't find that it was a very important factor. Only 2 people mentioned it. Of course, there might be others who, I don't know, followed family, and that family took the transition periods into consideration. But I didn't find them as the key factor. I found economic factors to be very important. And on the push side, I found them to be very important for mostly everybody. That is, both non-graduates and graduates. The only exceptional group were people who were at the same time young, educated, and with no family to support. Those people didn't mention economic arguments, whereas if somebody was educated but already had children, they would tend to speak about economic arguments also, or as the main arguments on the push side, such as this person here who was a chemist, and she earned relatively good money in Poland, but she didn't have an apartment, and she, since she didn't have a partner, and the father of the child was not supporting the child, she found it hard to rent an apartment, to pay for the rent. At the same time, she was too well off to have social housing, so she was obliged to move in with her mother, and that she found completely unacceptable. She thought she was an adult and she should take care of herself and live on her own. So that was her main reason for leaving Poland. And for other people, for the non-graduates, economic arguments in terms of mostly earnings more than lack of work itself were key arguments. But on the pull side, almost all my respondents were from the non-graduate group, spoke about economic arguments, the availability of jobs in Ireland, the wages. But for the non-graduates, an even more important thing was social factors. That is, every single person mentioned that they chose Ireland because they were going there because of family, friends. Like this person here who went to join her son. And she said clearly that she came to him because she's not that brave, she didn't speak English, she wouldn't go somewhere where she didn't have that kind of initial support. So this idea of going to someone that Professor White has coined, as opposed to going into the dark, somewhere where you don't know anybody, was key for the non-graduates, I found. It was not key for the graduates. This was rarely mentioned by some people who had I don't know, a partner they wanted to join, but it was not one of the main factors they mentioned. In terms of the decisions, I found sort of 2 patterns. First, the first pattern is that an occasion popped up, and so the person reacted and went. Like this person quoted here, who didn't really have an idea of going anywhere, but a colleague from work offered him to go with him and do exactly the same kind of work in Ireland. So he went. But he said that I didn't want to go either to Ireland or England, I couldn't care, but this offer popped up, so I took it. And another group was people who actually decided to emigrate because of mostly economic problems at home, and then we're looking for opportunities and looking at, you know, where do I know someone, or where is there an opportunity I can see. So that was for the non-graduates. For the graduate group, on the pull side, there were economic factors such as well-paying jobs in Ireland. But there was also a broad spectrum of cultural factors. Obviously, knowing the language or wanting to learn the language better was one of them. But actually, the range of factors was quite broad. I don't know. There was a doctor who said that he was very much anti-abortion and even anti-contraception. So Ireland was the only place where he could go and avoid touching upon the subject with his patients. somebody mentioned that they were a great fan of U2, so they went there, which is not a real argument, she acknowledged, but still, at least Ireland ring the bell for her. It was something she took into consideration. And then a very interesting aspect that I noticed, which was not part of my theoretical framework, I wasn't thinking of in terms of core and periphery initially, but it came up so many times that that I decided to include it, was the idea that actually many migrants compared Ireland with the UK and saw Ireland as this calmer place, maybe not so multicultural, maybe a bit more rural, more backward, and for some this was a strong argument to go there and not to England, because they didn't wish to live in a huge city in a multicultural environment, like the people quoted here. And they took this even further, which was a huge surprise to me. They compared with Poland, obviously. And for many of the respondents, it wasn't obvious whether Poland is the core or Ireland is the core, and which is the backward country here, because in terms of infrastructure, the buildings or the variety of electronic equipment in shops, for example, they thought Ireland was quite backward. Also, several people commented about the education of the Irish. These people were usually doing simple jobs in an environment of simple people. But they believe that Polish people in general know more, get more factual information from school, and the Irish can't point things out on the map. In that sense, they were considering Poland to be the core and Ireland to be the periphery, in spite of moving towards the periphery. This was not as obvious for the graduates, because they were often presenting Ireland as more of a core in terms of being multicultural, which for those people was seen as an advantage or as a sign of development, or being more tolerant, more open. So some people actually saw the core as being in Poland, other people saw it as being in Ireland. To conclude, if we look at the push and pull factors separately, it's quite obvious that on the push side, economic factors were very prominent for everybody, except for this elite group of educated people without family obligations. On the other hand, on the pull side, the differences between the graduates and the non-graduates were much larger. The non-graduates, their main factor which they took into consideration was social networks and the help they could get from family, friends, people already in Ireland. Whereas for graduates, social networks were not very important. They were rarely mentioned, and if they were, only in very personal situations, like I fell in love with somebody who already lives there. There was one person who actually met somebody online and then joined them in Ireland and married them. And for graduates, the variety of factors they took into consideration seems to be broader. There were economic factors, but also various types of cultural factors, language being a prominent one, but also a wide range of other factors. The third thing that was quite striking to me, that Ireland was seen by the group of Polish migrants both as a cultural core and as a cultural periphery, depending on whom I spoke to and what aspects he deemed important in judging what the core is and what the periphery is. Thank you.
I have so many questions, but I'll restrain myself. Now the final presenters actually are not in this session. They're not coming, but we have two extra presenters
who should have given their papers earlier on in the conference. So I'd like to invite Andrea. Oh, he's already good. So he will be our next speaker.
Giorgio, sorry. I'm going to use the other way around. But Giorgio.
Okay, introducing myself. I'm Giorgio Iotti. I'm assistant professor in political economy at the University of Naples in Museum. And today I'll show you a paper written in collaboration with Professor Marco Musella. And this paper focuses on an important issue that, especially in the last decade, has gained great attention among Italian scholars. So, the impact of internal migration of income distribution. In our paper, internal migration means the movement of people from the poorest to richest area of Italy. So, in other words, we analyze the effect of income inequality of the movement of people from southern to northern region. The motivation for this paper arises from the fact that especially in the last decade, the movement of workers from southern to northern region has become a problem, serious problem for Italian economy. Historically, we had that two waves of internal migration. The first one, in the period between 1915 to 1917, in which it has been estimated that about 9 million people moved from south to northern region. The particular is that this migration flow was characterized by people with low education level and skill. The second main international migration is more recent. It started in also of 19 to present. And the main difference between the first and second internal migration is that now are young people with high education level, high human capital, and high skill move to the poorest to the from the poorest to the richest area. So, however, labor market theory say that this phenomenon is not always negative. This because the movement of this worker from the poorest to richest area could mitigate the economic imbalances and income inequality among areas. So, in other words, this phenomenon has a positive effect from this point of view. Literature, Laudaro, Elvis, and Johnson claim that this effect, the effect of internal migration on income inequality, they exist. Also, Galbraith concluded that migration works as an instrument of redistribution among areas. And finally, Carnage Zimmerman concluded that the impact of internal migration on income distribution depends on the level of education of migrants. However, this conclusion have been rejected by several authors. The problem concerns both the empirical methodology that this author used in order to estimate the effect of internal migration on inequality. And the second problem is the prior assumption that these authors do in order about the socioeconomic characteristics of migrants. So the issue concerning the impact of internal migration on income inequality is still open, and the aim of this paper is to investigate empirically if the Kahneman-Zimmerman hypothesis there exists. In order to test this hypothesis, we use data about 20 Italian regions, the period between 2004 to 2015. We use 3 variables: Gini coefficient. Gini coefficient captures the level of concentration of income, regional employment rate, and the migration balance. Migration balance is calculatable as the difference between the number of individuals moving in and out of the region divided for the region population or multiplied for 100. The econometric model is a panel data with a fixed effect. The fixed effect allows us to capture the heterogeneity present in Italian regions. And this is our benchmark. So, in this table, we have that the level of Gini coefficient at t time depends on its past value and unemployment rate. In this case, we have that migration balance does affect the level of income distribution. But the problem is that this model is biased. It's biased because it does consider the autocorrelation problem of data. So in order to correct this problem, we use an autoregressive distributed lag model. When we modify our model, we have that the migration balance affect the level of Gini coefficient. In particular, if we look the coefficient in post-crisis period, where that the migration, the internal migration, is able instrument in order to reduce the inequality in internal regions. So when the first way is very high, so this means that the model is playing a good part of of this issue. So, conclusion. So, in this paper we have tried to test the Zimmermann hypothesis about the effect of internal migration on income inequality. Econometric results seems to confirm the existence of this hypothesis. But it's important to note a negative consequence of migration. So, if this phenomenon in the long run, this phenomenon can lead a loss of human capital and a desertification process of the poorest region. This phenomenon can lead as a negative effect on the economic growth of southern region in the long run. So, in other words, this phenomenon doesn't allow the poorest region to have a balanced economic growth and recovery the gap against the northern region. So, I stop here. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, showing that equality is a very complicated concept. Andrea, last but not least, thank you.
Let's skip to the end. Good afternoon to everyone. I am Andrea Cerasuolo, a collaborator of the Department of Political Science at Federico II of Naples, and today I'm going to introduce you to the MAD project, which could be an effective manner to foster integration of migrants. MAD stands for Multidimensional Training of Adult Volunteer to Foster Migrant Integration. And it is a project funded by the European Commission through its program Erasmus+, which is the European Union's program to support education, training, youth, and sports in Europe. The MAD project is aimed essentially to strengthen positive bonds within modern societies, drawing out integration as an unfolding method. It proposes a comprehensive and innovative approach in order to promote social inclusion of migrants. As you can see, the project was designed and is being carried out by 7 partners. There are partners from Germany, Italy, of course, Romania, Greece, Cyprus, Turkey, and UK. There are both two kinds of institutions. JEST academic institution, such Federico II and the Department of Computer Science of the Romanian University, and also private association for the other project partners. MAV will pursue its objectives by including all kinds of stakeholders who can be concerned about migrants' integration within hosting societies, such as professional trainers and policymakers in adult learning working with migrants from one side, and from the other side, migrants requiring work in a decent life perspective. Guidance and motivation strategies are two of the most relevant tools in order to achieve integration. In this way, migrants volunteers are stimulated to become propagators of awareness, soft skills, and capabilities through MAV training. During the kickoff meeting of the project partners held in Naples at the beginning of November 2017, was decided to produce 4 intellectual outputs, which will serve the general purpose of the project. The first one is the Guide for Trainers, IO1, which is completed by now. The second one is Adult Learning Toolkit, IO2, almost completed. The third one is the Adult Learning Course, IO3, which is a draft version by now. And the fourth, Communication Toolkit, or IO4, is still in design. Let's start with the first intellectual output, which is the Guide for Trainers. This guide proposes the fundamental element of a training process to involve volunteer migrants as a mentor of other migrants. So, in order to create this intellectual output and to identify strategies and content which the training guide should contain, each MAV project partners selected a number of national and international experts for an overall number of 92 professionals in several fields of services for migrants, such as counselors, psychologists, social workers employed in migrants integration, and trainers working with adult learning. In fact, the guide is based on this consultation. So the guide identifies 3 main groups of migrants who could be trained as volunteers. Migrant women, first-generation migrants with advanced language skills, and second-generation migrants. The contents to be transmitted by trainers to the volunteers are divided in 2 categories. The first one is the cognitive category, which means dealing with an information perspective about knowledge and transfer of learning tools from trainers to volunteers. Information such as maybe about health system, job policies, integration issues. The second one is metacognitive, and it focuses on the capabilities, expertise, and know-how which will be acquired by volunteers at the end of this project. Regarding regarding MAV teaching methodologies, it takes inspiration from the OED approach. OED stands for Outreach, Empowerment, and Diversity, which contains method and principle developed to support adult education and specifically aimed to disadvantaged groups like migrants and refugees. So in order to establish a system that identifies, documents, assesses, and certifies the learning undertaken by migrants, MAV will use the European guideline for validating non-formal and informal training, developed by CEDEFOP. CEDEFOP stands for the European Center for Development of Vocational Training. This as a means of confirming that an individual has acquired learning outcome against a relevant standard. A brief feedback. A brief feedback questionnaire was forwarded to other experts to evaluate the guide for trainers. Since the guide was granted on interviews with conducted with the expert, this feedback operation on the file has given experts a chance to comment on the guide and suggest further advancement. My department of UNINA, Department of Political Science, has distributed this feedback for to 12 experts. 9 of them are Italian and 3 Polish. The opinions and comments collected are very positive and favorable. We now arrive to the MAVA Adult Learning Toolkit, which is the second international output of the MAVA project, and one of its central products. This toolkit will prepare adult learners who in turn will later serve as volunteer peer trainers in migrant integration to have a reliable understanding of a specific aspects of adult learning, such as its theory, the role of literacy, language acquisition, entrepreneurial skills, motivation, and promotion of the MAV concept. The toolkit also presents guidelines, online learning modules, and principles of adult learning for the target group of migrants, based on their needs, and a good practice for the MAV learning process. Good practice gathered from the other EU countries, especially from the ones of the project partners. About this toolkit, the MAV coordinator, such as IFA AKADEMII, the German partner, designed a draft document, and the contributing partner provided a substantial and high valuable addition, sharing their know-how achieved in years of working in the field, and in the field of course, of adult learning, volunteering, and development of entrepreneurial skills. The division of labor is essential in this kind of project, because every partner has been entrusted with the task that has been most congenial to him, according to its work history, expertise, and field of research. A MAV website is now online, but is not completed. It is available in English, German, Greek, Italian, Romanian, and Turkish. The homepage of the website contains a description of the MAV project, its objective, and the method which will be used to achieve them, and the overall learning strategy. In the partner section, there are a list of MAV partners and a brief description of each of them, with a link to the respective website. In the new section, there are indications about activities already performed by MAV partner, like the transitional meeting, as well as the description of the first output of the project, the MAV Guide for Trainers. In the output and results section, there is a list of the intellectual output, the IOs, which we have already seen, of the MAV project. It was added a specific section which regards only the MAV Guide for Trainers. which is briefly described in a caption, and it is also downloadable in English, German, Italian, Greek, and Turkish. Partner are still developing an e-learning platform linked to the project site on which to administer online learning courses. Here we have a screenshot from the MAG website and a link to it. So we arrive to the final remarks. So the MAG project, as so far known, a good start and a constant development. There is a strong harmony among the people involved in the project, and the level of satisfaction is high. Despite some delays in reaching a few intermediate targets, the overall roadmap was generally respected. The project could represent, in our hope, a benchmark for several countries which are looking for good practice regarding integration of migrants. There are also some difficulties. For example, what is needed to work on and to be improved is the dissemination of the project outside the circle of partners. And another difficulty is that the project of this kind is represented by the coordination of the various partners involved, because they all have some framework to respect, different by countries. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Should we perhaps take 3 questions and then ask the speakers to answer them and take another 3 after that? Yes, Pavel.
4.
4? Okay. Do you have 4 yourself?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I have, I guess, question, maybe a comment to Giorgio. So first of all, it was somehow surprising for me how unstable the model was. And first of all, the first one, because even if you just look at the Gini coefficient in the period of t-1, it was even the change of a sign. So then you introduce the autocorrelation stuff, but the question, could you just comment on that, why it is so unstable? That's the first point. And the second point, because unfortunately I missed probably the quite important part of your presentation. How in fact, so your Gini coefficient was just defined on the regional level, yeah?
Yeah.
So in fact, and just please correct me if I'm wrong, so what your model is showing in fact, that because of migration we can just decrease the level of intra-regional inequality, but at the same time it can increase inter-regional inequality, if I correct you. So this is the interpretation. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. This is the model. Okay. That Gini coefficient, the level of income inequality at theta. I suppose that you can assume that the Gini coefficient at t time is correlated to Gini coefficient at t-1. MB is a migration balance, so it's the differences between population flow and flow in the single region. And one is an employment rate. We have that these two variables is a t-1. In order to avoid the collinearity problem. Okay, fixed effect control the heterogeneity among the people, but when you use a fixed effect, fixed effect model, it does take into account the autocorrelation among the variables. Because you can think that also the NB at t-1 depend by, or depends on its previous value and so on. You know, you have that when you use this model, the results are biased. But this model is useful in order to have a benchmark result. Okay. However, in order to avoid the misspecification model, you please. Okay.
Yeah, and here everything is okay.
Okay. But in order to avoid the bias of the result, you need to do a robustness check. Because when you use another model, the result can be totally different. So in order to estimate the test, the Zimmerman hypothesis that migration reduce the income inequality, I use a simple automatic model. This model allows to have robust results. And this model, we have that, especially in the post-crisis period, effectively the migration reduces the income inequality. But in my opinion, there is a thing that scholars need to investigate. That's what is the long-run effect of the internal migration of economic growth in poorest areas. Though, in our opinion, this paper is only a first step, but in order to test an hypothesis. But if this is true, it's only a single part of the issue. The real problem is the long-run effect of this internal migration of the economic of poorest region. Because if this phenomenon goes in the long run, persists, so you can do that. What policy national government can use in order to recover the gap between southern, in order if younger people with high education, high skill, high level of you cannot move to the north. So this is a very important issue in my opinion. This paper is only an empirical research in order to confirm or not a simple hypothesis. But you can remember that this is only the first step of more interesting research.
Thank you. Salva, did you have a couple of extra questions?
I have questions to Stefan, in fact, or one or two questions, because what you did was quite tricky, because you skipped the estimations, and this is what my question is about. Because in fact, two maybe questions. So first of all, what was the impact of social welfare? Because my intuition would be that in the time of let's say, as you call it, turbulence, the importance of social welfare is increasing. So the first point, and the second point, what do you think? Because you are considering only just wages. And my experience is that what we really should look at, they would be rather expected wages. So wages times, let's say, probability of finding employment. So what would be your answer, particularly with reference to the social welfare issue? Because the second is maybe technical.
Social welfare, some. In Ireland, and at the time of GFC, some in UK, and not much in Germany, because I think because Germany actually had a different pattern, and not much in the Netherlands, which had a different pattern. So generally, what we don't know, and that's the question of with this particular sort of sample is, what sort of adjustments happen in the population that, you know, some people have gone. Some people, those who would take advantage of social welfare, they may decide that they're going to pack their bags and go, and they disappear from that group that's actually being interviewed. So it's sort of a weird sample that you can only squeeze so much information out of. So I think that, but generally social, of course, at the time of turbulence, of the kind of economic crisis, social welfare matters, but also other, you know, given that earnings affect intentions to stay. Those who are successful hold on to it. Those in Ireland, I think those who can secure social welfare, again, that was an incentive to stay. So generally, if you look at the actual stayers in Ireland, that group has actually been quite those who intended to stay has been very significant group. But Ireland was also interesting because it was a country that went through that very turbulent reaction to GFC. It really things stumbled, and then it bounced back at the end of the period. So that is the expectations. That's your other thing is that, you know, what do people actually, that we don't know much about. You know, what do actually people expect to happen? And these surveys don't really say anything about that. Yeah.
Thank you. Who else would like to ask a question? Yeah, Dominika.
It's again for Stefan. I'm still wondering why it's the high earners that are encouraged to stay. First of all, earnings at exactly which point do you take into consideration? Because if somebody is a high earner and then loses his job, then he's a zero earner, so he's in the other group, but it's still the same person. And I was also wondering, well, if they're bankers, then the crisis maybe made their position better, right? If they're bankers, for example, you know, the crises tend to increase inequality, so maybe their actual position is better, even if it's a crisis.
Well, these are earnings by standard of given the earnings distribution within this interviewed group. So they are not relative to natives, they are not high earners. We don't really have in these samples bankers or successful doctors, or, you know. So in that sense, you have to bear in mind that it's sort of highly relative. But generally, if you and we are talking about to what extent intentions to move on quickly or relatively in the short, in the near future, so within a year, or to stay indefinitely, whatever that sentiment means, but, you know, don't think about it, stay indefinitely in that sense, are affected by earnings. So these are intentions to do something. So we'd say that those, normally they're not, but in Ireland at that time where there was a crisis, earnings matter. They become significant in regressions. The question is how do you interpret that? So I think we tend to think is that Homo economicus matters at the time of trouble. Homo sociological is essentially an everyday creature. That we tend to overestimate the sort of importance of economic factors. So we have to sort of generalize. That, you know, by and large, on a day-to-day basis, it is other things that dominate people's lives. But when there is a shock, then people start to worry about about things like earnings, and that seems to be reflected in the intentions to the mobility intentions. But of course, if you really want to generalize from that, you would have to then study people's actual behavior and the earnings, and the actual meaning of earnings and the earnings expectations, and that would be a totally different study.
Thank you. Yes, please. Yes, I've got a question for you. So I can imagine that there is also a group, a quite substantial group in the case of immigration, of people who are in between. So I imagine that there are people who are graduates, but they do simple jobs, not qualified jobs. And I would like to ask you if do you take them into consideration in your research, or is it just graduates and non-graduates?
Yes, very much so. The criterion of graduates and non-graduates was purely on education, not on the jobs they did, because a majority of the graduates did relatively simple jobs in Ireland.
Who else would like to ask a question? Yes.
Also to you. It was very interesting what you said about the fact to comparing the both countries, Poland and Ireland. And my question is, because I did 6 interviews with Polish workers in France, but working in as blue collars, and they always stress the difference between Poland and France, and they've got whole army just to show that in Poland we've got better shopping centers, we've got better cars, we've got better houses, and even gardens. And after that we've got a trinity. I mean, Marie Curie, Skłodowska, Chopin, and at the end John Paul II. And but this was the blue collars. So I think they are economic migrants and looking for like low placed in a prestige scale for the jobs that are low placed in this prestige scale. So it's very important for their self-esteem to show that they're coming from a country which is better in some aspects. That's what my question was, if you've got some people working maybe in this managerial level, or as you told us, the graduated one. And my question is they are also comparing in this sense, the both countries or not?
Yes, they are also comparing, but the results of their comparisons and even the things they take into consideration are quite different. They didn't talk about what is in the shops, for example. They talked about Ireland being more tolerant to gays. So that, of course, placed Ireland as the core. Whereas the non-graduates, they talked either about the material aspect, although I didn't have that impression that you had, that they needed to somehow build up their self-esteem because of where they're located, because some of them spoke about actually being very surprised that they expected Ireland to be much more developed, and then the lady comes to Dublin and the houses are small and kind of old, and oh, what a surprise. So in that sense, I didn't think that they were doing that to build up their self-esteem.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, somebody over there wanted to ask. I have a question to Dominica. Can you hear me? This is what, as well. You took education as your main variable. Okay.
You took education as your main variable, but I was interested in another variable, which is when they arrived. Because I could imagine that if people came around 2004, 2005, then they were like pioneers. And it might have been that fact, I mean, together with the fact that they were highly educated, which explained why they didn't use networks. So first of all, I wondered like when they arrived, and secondly, I wondered if they were the pioneers, they then invited other people, so they were involved in networks, but they were just the people at the beginning of them.
Well, the people in my sample, I think I put it up, but I didn't say it, were either from the period 2004 to 2008, the pre-crisis, or after 2010. There was nobody from 2008 and 9.
Yeah.
And there was a wide variety, except for those 2 years. Since I divided them up along education, I wouldn't, from that particular sample, want to generalize about the role of networks in particular times. But I don't know if I'm allowed to say this already, but we did a quantitative study in CMR where some of my questions were also asked. And I noticed, checking for the significance of networks, that they were hugely, or very significant in 2006-07, but not so much before, and not so much after. That's the interesting part. So perhaps that will be a conclusion somewhere also.
Oh, well, that's really fascinating. Thank you. Are people sure they don't want to ask any more questions? Shall I hand back the microphone to you and wrap up properly? You've got one.
No dobrze, proszę Państwa, dotarliśmy do końca. Chciałem na raz jeszcze wszystkim Państwu podziękować za przyjazd do Gdyni, do odwiedzenia, za to, że Państwo zwiedzili nasze muzeum i wzięli udział w naszej konferencji. Mam nadzieję, że zobaczymy się również w przyszłym roku. Chciałbym raz jeszcze wszystkim bardzo podziękować. Chciałem też podziękować naszym tłumaczom, naszej obsłudze technicznej. Jeszcze takie kwestie techniczne. My wyślemy w najbliższym czasie też maila z informacją dotyczącą możliwości opublikowania artykułów, referatów, które tutaj zostały wygłoszone, także prześlemy to razem ze zdjęciami z konferencji, z jakimś krótkim podsumowaniem. Także nie będę już przedłużał, może ode mnie to tyle. Raz jeszcze bardzo Państwu dziękuję.
Również dziękujemy.
Nie będę próbował podsumowywać, więc bardzo dziękuję. Ale
Okay, but it would be the final.
No more. No, okay, this is the last See you next time.
Ja sobie tylko zaznaczył, ktoś tu zalał. Do nas zgodziłeś przynajmniej nie będę pani głowy zawracał.
Czarnkowe na przykład. One są takie, że...
Ale to nie są aluminiowe?
Nie, chyba nie.
Ale to jest najlepsze najlepsze. Nie ma dwóch Rafał. To brakowało wczoraj.
No dobra, sprawdzimy ten list i będziemy się... Dobra, ale bo mamy też tą drugą listę, zobaczymy, spróbujemy się z nimi skontaktować.
No, z tymi, co pobierali. Pewnie ktoś nie jest,
tak nie bez użycia tak naprawdę. Tak, oddałem. Nie padło chyba z koledzy. Tak. Mam tam, że to jest mój, nie? Yes, I will send you all information. I know.
Okay, thanks.
Once again, thank you for coming. All the best.
I understand that you are much may take me as a days and wait 2 hours, 2 hours. When you became, I will sit here in the hall. Yeah, just waiting for you. Okay, every time with the watch. Okay. Hour or 2 hours. Wait.
I will be just in a few
No problem. Yes. Okay, wait.
Ale to jest właśnie ten australijski. Jeśli by oni wyłapowali tak jak stoi w Australii, to sądy dają nam żadną wagę. W związku z tym zamiast sądu się wyszłać do jednego kraju, gdzie australijski sąd ma ale pytanie, gdyby świat działał, jak to wyglądało,
Ale pytanie, czy jak tym roku w ogóle zabrać?
No podobno jest, do końca listopada, to nie wiem, czy cokolwiek strzela, na razie jest szerowane, żeby wymyślić nowe rozwiązanie. No właśnie, ale nie mówię, że
Podobno jest kompleks.
mi się to tak mają.
ale to od nich.
To są te problemy. I jak pierwsze, w sensie